Jonathan and Dave, you guys ready to go? All right, we'll get started with this. Mr. Trumbull, we're going to take attendance here.
Siegel here. Schwartz present.
Danaher here.
Forcell here.
Johnston here.
All right, wonderful. I don't see any oral communication notes at this point, but perhaps later. Approval of the minutes. Anybody have comments on the minutes?
Yes. Okay, so there were some incorrect things, and I can hand you my thing afterwards. But the person on the first page, the person I spoke with was not the ex-CEO. It was a vice president at Pepco, and Pepco was spelled without the capital C. And it was a woman, so she confirmed that pad matter transformers are standard rather than the standard. And she said that standards documents for transformers in the underground districts in DC, the District of Columbia needed work. And then Commissioner Schwartz said she has encouraged colleagues at DOE to document best practices and alternatives for undergrounding. So I can hand this to you afterwards. And then on page 5, the sort of third paragraph, Vice Chair Schwartz remarked that having solar resources visible in the community can be more meaningful than solar resources. And rather than the Worcester Regional Transit Authority is using solar. So, and then on the, let's see, it was on the, I'm just trying to think where it was. Oh, okay, on page 8, Vice Chair Schwartz agreed that the UAC, not the CAC, the UAC could form a fiber subcommittee again, and rather, and then it was, because what I said at the time was that myself and Chair Foster and Commissioner Ballantyne, we participated in one several years ago, and then it was finished and we were done. And let's see, and then instead of saying I questioned whether informing, I just asked whether informing the CIC about AMI or informing the UAC, which would be more efficient. Questioned has sort of a sense that I was challenging it when I just asked the question. And then under Vice Chair Schwartz suggested encouraging members of the CAC to apply for seats on the UAC, and then period, I said being informed and responsible for a range of issues could be worthwhile. And there's, okay. Okay, so that was with those changes, and I can hand this to you.
Does any other commissioner have any edits for the minutes? Is there, yes?
Move approval, including those suggested changes.
Okay, second? Second. All right, all in favor? Aye. Okay, great. Thank you, Judith. Any comments on the agenda before we proceed? Any revisions from, all right. Reports from commissioner meetings and events. All right. General Manager of Utilities report.
Okay. Good evening, Commissioners. So Jonathan Abendschein and myself, Dave Yun, will be pinch hitting for Dean Batchelor tonight while he's recovering from shoulder surgery. He should be back by next month. All right. So Jonathan and I will be sharing the GM report tonight. First one is hydraulic conditions. Recent storms have resulted in reservoir conditions that are average or slightly above average compared to historical levels. Cumulative precipitation in the Central Sierras for the 2018-19 water year is currently at 116% of average for this date and 105% of the average in the northern Sierras. And statewide snowpack levels are currently 125% of average for this date. If the rest of the winter stays dry from here on, the water year precipitation could still end up below average, but the year is off to a good start. Next item is Upgrade Downtown project nears the final stages of construction. The Upgrade Downtown project along University Ave and neighboring streets of downtown is moving toward the final stages of construction. Construction on the final block of University Avenue between High Street and the on and off ramps at Alma Street is expected to begin later this week or the first part of next week, depending upon weather conditions. City staff have developed a traffic control plan with a contractor to alleviate traffic congestion and ensure the safety of motorists, pedestrians, and cyclists. Drivers are encouraged to detour to roads such as Linton, Forest, or Hamilton to enter downtown. The major utility infrastructure work in downtown is expected to be complete by the end of March of this year. Project details, including maps, traffic control plan, and construction schedule, are available at upgradedowntownpa.com. Upcoming PG&E gas pipeline work in Palo Alto. As part of its gas pipeline safety and maintenance program, PG&E will be replacing sections of its gas transmission lines running through Palo Alto. Construction will occur in several locations and is expected to begin around mid-February and continue through July. City staff are communicating project details with affected stakeholders, including residents, schools, and businesses, and confirming that PG&E has proper traffic controls in place to ensure safe routes around the construction areas for bicyclists, pedestrians, and motorists. Project details, including construction schedule and maps, are also posted in a news item on our home webpage and will be updated as more information becomes available.
Switching to energy efficiency here, Stanford Hospital recently completed a set of efficiency improvements, and these major efficiency upgrades were installed under the utility's Business New Construction program. Stanford installed high efficiency lighting and controls, variable speed drives on fans and water pumps, energy efficient glazing on windows, and hot aisle containment for the data center. The hospital was built 21% more efficient than the baseline, and it'll result in continuing savings for several years of 4.2 million kilowatt hours per year. That's enough to power over 7,000 homes. It's a significant fraction of our energy usage. This one project is equivalent to approximately 70% of CPAU's electric efficiency savings for FY 2017. And this is the last project to go through the Business New Construction program, which officially stopped taking applications in 2017. So a really big win for Stanford Hospital and for the city as a whole. I also wanted to make you aware of a new video that came out from BOSCA, the Bay Area Water Supply and Conservation Agency. BOSCA is one of the, I think, unsung hero joint action agencies that we belong to. And this video is titled 15 Years of BOSCA Representing Your Voice. And it really highlights the value that BOSCA has provided to the 26 member agencies that purchase water from the SFPUC. It's, you know, as a joint action agency, BOSCA delivers really critical operational support and advocacy on behalf of the city that really performs functions that we couldn't perform, any of our agencies on our own. Some of the notable achievements that are highlighted in the video include its critical oversight on the $4.8 billion water supply improvement projects, the $40 million that it's saved members over the last 15 years by ensuring that SFPUC properly allocates costs to wholesale customers under the contract. Again, this is something that would be really difficult for any individual member to track. They also organized a prepay of debt owed to the SFPUC that is saving members over $62 million over 21 years. I think between those two things, Palo Alto's share of that is about $8 million. They've negotiated a 25-year water supply agreement that we'll be talking about tonight, and they've saved over 2.9 billion gallons of water through conservation programs as well. They organize regional conservation programs. I would encourage you to view the video if you want to understand everything that Bosca does for us. The video can be found on Vimeo, and we'll forward you a link so you can take a look. And I also wanted to note that Bosca's general manager, Nicole Sankula, is here. She's going to be talking about the water supply agreement amendments, and we're very happy to have her here.
All right, thank you.
Can I ask one clarifying question? You mentioned the Stanford Hospital. I was under the impression that the Stanford campus was not part of the utility and that only the research park was. How much of campus is served by CPAU?
The Stanford Research Park, the Stanford Hospital, and the Stanford Shopping Center are all part of the city. And then the borders end right around there.
All right. That's great news about the hospital. Thank you for those reports. Are there any commissioner comments this evening? Okay. Then our first business item is about the water supply agreement. As you mentioned, we've got the chairman of Bosco here, and this is, Mr. Schwartz and I talked with staff earlier this week, and we're not really in a position to negotiate on their behalf or to provide details and contracts have been negotiated on behalf of 26 parties, but it's good to understand what the changes have been done, and it's a good opportunity for us to learn more about Bosco, so we're really appreciative.
So thank you, commissioners, and again, I want to thank Nicole Sankula for being here tonight. This is Nicole's been instrumental in achieving these negotiated amendments with the SFPUC. It's a complicated set of amendments and has required, I think a lot of work keeping Palo Alto utilities staff and all the rest of the agencies informed about the progress over the course of the negotiations. And we talked about some of the benefits Bosca provides. This is yet another example of that. So I wanted to start by having Nicole introduce the amendments. So thank you, Nicole.
Actually, Nicole, will you take a minute or two first, outline a little bit more about Bosco, how it's organized, how it's staffed and funded?
Absolutely, be my pleasure. Good evening, commissioners. My name is Nicole Sankula. I am the Chief Executive Officer for Bosca. We are actually a special district enabled through special legislation that was brought to the state really by all the 26 wholesale customers, including Palo Alto, that purchase water from the San Francisco Regional Water System. So back in 2003, actually it was 2002, collectively, those customers went to the state legislature and said, we need to form ourselves as a regional agency because we have no representative voice in our affairs with San Francisco and our water supply contract. That's why we are now celebrating our 15th year as a special district, which is a pretty significant event when you think about the 26 agencies. You serve 1.8 million residential customers, over 40,000 businesses and community organizations across 3 counties. So San Mateo County, almost all of San Mateo County, 8 water utilities in Santa Clara County, and 2 water utilities in southern Alameda County. All of you rely upon that San Francisco Hetch Hetchy Regional Water System. Some of you, like Palo Alto, are basically 100% dependent upon that source. There are others that have diversified supplies, but you collectively are together in your negotiations with San Francisco. You are connected through a water supply agreement, which is a unique structure in a wholesale retail relationship for water. And that contract, actually, interestingly enough, is a result of a lawsuit brought by the city of Palo Alto against San Francisco in the 70s for capricious rate-making policies. So you really are part of the reason that the contract exists, and the contract exists to protect your financial interests and your water supply interests. And so we're a small agency. There's 8 staff. Our office is in San Mateo. We have a board of 26 primarily elected officials, 1 from every member agency. And we work and focus our efforts on our goals, which are a reliable supply of high-quality water at a fair price. Everything that we do pins back to those goals for you and your customers. And that includes our work on your agreement with San Francisco, which was renegotiated most recently in 2009. So it's basically just the second version of the agreement. First one was in 1984, and we renegotiated in 2009. And one of our jobs is to administer that agreement on your collective behalf. As John mentioned, I have one person on my staff whose sole purpose is to watch the money that goes across the county line, as we say, up to San Francisco for the water that you purchase, and to make sure that you pay only your fair share in proportion to your use. That is the entire construct of your financial relationship with San Francisco. You buy 2/3 of the water, you pay 2/3 of the costs of operating that system. And we make sure that that's all you pay for. In the course of administering the contract since 2009, we have come across some things that needed to be fixed. They didn't change the basic structure of the contract. So again, the contract is about receiving fair benefits for fair payment of costs. And, but it was things that identified that needed to be addressed as part of administration. You want to make sure San Francisco has the money they need to do capital improvements. You certainly don't want them saying, hey, we can't fix that project because we don't have the right money. So trying to deal with those things. But you also want to make sure that you're following their money and that they're spending it right on the capital that you want. So oversight of those things. So there ended up being 7 amendments. Some were ones that we put on the table. Some were ones that San Francisco put on the table. I started these negotiations in a one-on-one conversation with the general manager of the Public Utilities Commission. He and I meet on a monthly basis. And in the course of those conversations last spring, I said, Harlan, I think we have a few amendments we need to deal with. Here's the ones I'm interested in. He said, I have a few I'm interested in too. Let's figure it out and let's make this happen. And we essentially met every other Friday from then on out until November as an executive team with their lawyers, our legal team, their technical team, financial team, and ours. But it produced what I think is a very solid set of amendments that don't stray from policy positions that are basically embedded in the contract, but make things work better. Things that have changed over time that we need to make sure are correct, and to protect your financial interests, which is a major portion of it. And so that's what those amendments represent. I'm not going to go through all of them because I think your staff is going to walk you through all those, but I would certainly be pleased to answer any questions about those or the agency. So, thank you.
Thank you. Really appreciate it. Appreciate the good work that went into this.
Thanks.
So, Mr. Chair, can I ask a question?
Please.
So, this is way too fresh in my mind. My 2 government commissions I serve on both meet on the same day. And one of them is called LAFCO. And our job in the Santa Clara County LAFCO is to audit every special district every 5 years.
Right.
We have one regional body, but it's primarily in San Mateo, so we never see that. Is there such a thing for BOXA?
Yeah, so we have been reviewed very early on. I think it was maybe about 2005 or so, shortly after the agency was formed, by both San Mateo and Santa Clara LAFCO. I don't recall Alameda County LAFCO doing that, but we went through like a service review to ensure that we weren't duplicating efforts and that there wasn't some odd boundary issues that weren't resolved, and there were no issues associated through that process.
So I probably should have remembered it since I've been on it since 2003.
Maybe, and I'm not sure how.
No need to respond to my ignorance.
But I do remember the questions because I had never gone through such a process at the time, so.
Yeah.
Any other questions from commissioners? All right, thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.
So now I'll turn it over to Lisa Bellier and Carla Daly, who manage our water supply portfolio, and besides Nicole, are the most well-versed on this contract in the room. So our purpose tonight, we're trying to make sure that this contract gets a little bit of time to get some vetting, that folks have had a chance to read the contract, because we do need to move quickly on adoption. And so we're planning to send this to our city council on consent. We'd like to have them confident that the UAC has been able to review this.
Good evening, Commissioners. My name is Lisa Belier, and I'm a resource planner working in the Resource Management Division. And I'd like to tell you about a little bit more details about these amendments. As you know, Palo Alto purchases its potable water supply from the San Francisco Public Utilities Commission. And you've heard quite a bit about the water supply agreement already from Nicole this evening. So I think I'll just move right ahead to tell you a little bit about what I'm going to go over. I'm going to give you an overview of the 7 amendments to the water supply agreement, and then tell you about the timeline for San Francisco and the wholesale customers to adopt these amendments. And these are in the form of the amended and restated water supply agreement, which is your attachment B. And there's a hyperlink to it because of its great length. In September, Palo Alto authorized BOSCA to negotiate with San Francisco to amend the water supply agreement. And those negotiations are complete and led to the amendments before you tonight. It is important to note that these amendments do not change the basic contract structure of the water supply agreement or Palo Alto's fundamental rights. In this slide, it shows just the topic of each of the 7 amendments to the water supply agreement. And I know you have a very packed agenda tonight. To try to expedite this, I'm going to focus on the four of the amendments that are more content and less administrative, but will be available if you have any questions on any of the amendments. So I'm going to focus on number 1, on the capital improvement program, number 2, the Tier 1 drought allocation plan, and number 4 and 5, asset classification and the wholesale capital fund. So Amendment 1 is an oversight of the SFPUC's capital improvement program. SFPUC has an ongoing capital improvement program to maintain the integrity of the regional water system. And wholesale customers are responsible for a portion of this upcoming work, which is estimated at $2 billion over the next 10 years. This amendment established a formal process for SFPUC and BOSCA to engage in the development of the 10-year CIP. This amendment ensures that BOSCA and the wholesale customers are involved in developing the 10-year capital improvement program and have the opportunity to comment on proposed changes to the water supply and delivery targets. This will give BOSCA and the wholesale customers the ability to oversee and scrutinize the SFPUC's capital program, which is a major factor in the resulting rates. The second amendment is regarding the Tier 1 drought plan, which is the formula the SFPUC uses to allocate water between retail and wholesale customers during drought. The Tier 1 drought plan needs to be updated. And to give you an example of why, if the Tier 1 allocation had been applied during the most recent drought, retail customers would have been allocated more water than during non-drought years. The Tier 1 formula was not applied during the recent drought because of the state-mandated drought reductions. So the SFPUC did not have to declare a drought that on its own, that the drought cutbacks were needed. But going forward, this amendment corrects the Tier 1 drought plan to ensure that retail customers must conserve at least 5% during a drought. And the amendment benefits Palo Alto by ensuring a more equitable allocation of water during a drought. The third amendment regarding the 2018 decisions is one of the more administrative amendments, and this is basically some water supply decisions that the SFPUC must make by 2018, and this amendment pushes that decision back by 10 years to 2028 to give more time to gather information on possible future water supplies. The asset classification amendment is a little bit more complicated. There's actually 3 slides on this one. The regional water system costs have to be divided and allocated in different ways. They have to be allocated between retail and wholesale customers, and this is approximately 1/3 of the cost to retail and 2/3 to wholesale customers, and it's based upon the usage of the customer groups. Regional water system costs also have to be allocated across power and water customers. So there's a certain set of the assets of the regional water system that benefit water and power customers. And those are the joint assets, and those costs are split 55% to power and 45% to water customers. So those are facilities that are located in the Sierras, known as the Hetch Hetchy Enterprise, and because of this cost allocation, it's very important that the assets are properly designated as water, power, or joint. Yes.
I just had a question. So the way that you formulated the proportional annual use of water seems to me that there might be some insights gained from that we could apply to the concept of a demand charge for the fixed costs running other parts of our system. And is that something that we could do in a future conversation when we're looking at rate design, to maybe look at what was the way you did it, because maybe it will help us understand something we could apply in a different context?
There may be opportunities to bring up that concept in a future discussion, and we'll have talks about the electric financial forecasts and rate studies, and then there may be electric cost of service and rate adjustments coming up where we can have that conversation.
Because I just think that whole idea of proportional usage is a really interesting concept that some economists are talking about, and I think it would way to do things in a more fair manner. So, as opposed to the most that you use on one day a month.
Yep.
Okay. Thank you for that comment. That's great. Okay. In fiscal year 2010 and 10 to 11, the SFPUC unilaterally made a change to the classification of a small number of Hetch Hetchy enterprise assets, and they changed from power to joint, which would have added $50 million in obligations to the wholesale customers. Luckily, Bosca caught it, disputed the change, and flagged it, and has been trying to resolve it since that time. This amendment resolves that dispute, as well as resolving the issue more broadly going forward by documenting and fixing the asset classification for each asset located in the Sierras as part of the Hetch Hetchy enterprise. So that, but as part of that, there were 7 projects that were very important to the SFPUC and important to wholesale customers. And in this amendment, the SFPUC and Bosca have come together and agreed on a specific cost allocation for those particular projects, even though the underlying asset may have a different classification than the project. But this was important, this was needed because of these 7 important projects. And then this slide goes over the benefits to the wholesale customers of this particular asset classification amendment. As I mentioned, it fixes the asset classification for 500 assets. It will stop any future unilateral changes. It mitigates the financial risk for 2 high-risk and possibly very expensive projects. It eliminates the need for an expensive new pipeline, and it ensures that power customers pay toward critically needed projects that maintain and enhance system reliability. And overall, this amendment ensures that wholesale customers pay only their fair share of upcoming capital work. So,
Can I ask one question about the unilateral changes? Was there a change in the use of the assets, or was there just a mistake where they allocated it wrong? I mean,
I think Nicole would be the right person to answer that question.
There was no change in the use of the asset. The asset's function remained the same. What happened was that there was some thinking within the accounting department at the PUC. These assets are older assets. They're the original pen stocks from the original project that the water goes through that have long since been paid off. So the concept was, well, they're paid off, so they're a new asset now. And so we can change the classification because it's a new asset. And we didn't like the classification before because it was only power. We think water runs through it, so it should be joint. And it was made it was made as a kind of an administrative step. And Christina Tang in my office, our financial manager, who goes through the books every year, saw it and was like, what happened with this? And so we flagged it and followed up on it and then pulled it aside, and we're kind of told the agreement of it.
Sorry, one more question on the asset allocation. So there's no unilateral opportunity to change with this amendment, and as I understood it, it's like a 5-year process to change it. So unless I'm misreading that, so correct me if I misread that. So if we notice, if there is a change in the way an asset is being used, maybe where it's gone from joint to power or something, do we have any capacity to change it to benefit the 26?
So the system upcountry is relatively fixed in its scope. And the question you bring up about whether there's something specific that changes, a benefit changes, is actually why we agreed to the 5 projects, changing classification for just projects as opposed to changing the underlying asset. And a good example of that is Mountain Tunnel is a 19-mile tunnel from Hetchy. It's a single-line conduit, one of the original tunnels, mortar-lined through 2/3 of it. It is a joint asset. So we pay typically, the wholesale customers pay 1/3 for work on Mountain Tunnel. About 5 years ago, Mountain Tunnel started to show greater signs of failing. So they were having pieces of the mortar fall off, which would be catastrophic if you had to shut it off. You'd have to shut Hetchy off, and the estimate was it would take 6 months to repair it or more. So we've worked closely with San Francisco to get the repair work going. But in doing that, in looking at the fix is really for water supply. Power really, I mean, not that they don't care, but they don't need to have, they could wait 6 months to generate power. The big push to get it done was a water interest. And so we agreed for the interim repairs at Mountain Tunnel, which were so important to the water side, to be one of those projects where we would accept a water cost allocation for just the project, while the tunnel itself remains a joint project. And that may very well be what we look at as we move to the future, these things show up. It's not so much that the asset changed, but maybe something specific has to change about the asset. Welcome.
Thank you.
Can I just ask another question while we're on the topic of the assets? Mitigates financial risk for 2 very high-risk and potentially expensive projects. Which 2 were those?
So back to that Mountain Tunnel. The other piece of the fix at that tunnel, again, so this is a 19-mile tunnel. It's 12, 14 feet in diameter. Right now it flows by gravity. There's no control on it. There's no valving on it. San Francisco's engineers have said, look, to alleviate having a problem in the future like we had this time with the failing lining, we should put basically a giant valve at the end of this tunnel so we can control the flow all the way up the tunnel, maintain greater control of the flow. And they were trying to push for that to be a water project too, because it was part of this Mountain Tunnel repair. And so what we've agreed to is no, that's not a water project. It will remain a joint project, and that's part of the agreement. So instead of paying 2/3 of the cost of this giant valve, you pay 1/3. And when you talk about things that are expensive in the future, valves are expensive things. Tunnels, they don't usually cost very much because once you build them, they're relatively stable. They don't have operating parts. This is a very, very, very large valve. It's actually like 2 or 3 valves. So the estimate of what it's going to cost to build it is still early, so it's got potential for greater increased risk. the potential of what it's going to take to operate it, and any potential risk in the future of failure. So we wanted to mitigate your risk by controlling that and saying you cannot change that. The other project was, Moccasin. There is, you may have remembered last year, Moccasin Dam at the bottom of Priest Grade. So it's a small dam at the bottom of their power system. So you guys know about this stuff. It, in the middle of the winter last year, experienced a design flood in that vicinity. And the dam didn't fail, but it nearly failed. They had failures of the spillways. It's a small dam, so it was all contained, but it's a major project risk. And so the dam is, we're talking about how to manage the cost of that. I'm looking at my notes here because I'm trying to remember how we did this. On this one, we wanted the interim repairs done quickly. Because part of this is also like making sure that they get their work done. So we said, okay, if you need to get their work done quickly, we'll accept the interim repairs, but Moccasin Dam has to remain a joint project. So again, it's kind of case by case where we think the risks are, and that overall larger project is a great risk. So hopefully it's clear.
Okay, shall we go on? Lisa?
So this is the Fifth Amendment, the Wholesale Capital Fund. This is a fund for revenue collected from wholesale customers for a set of capital projects that are revenue funded. Currently, the balance in the fund is reconciled every 5 years, but this amendment provides for an annual instead of a 5-year reconciliation. This will better match the SFPUC's budget requirements, appropriation process, and project spending needs. Regardless of how often the reconciliation process happens, wholesale customers continue to be responsible for actual revenue-funded capital expenditures. And this amendment ensures that the SFPUC has the necessary resources for capital improvements that benefit Palo Alto, while not holding an excessive amount of wholesale customer funds. So the last two amendments I'll move through fairly quickly as they're more administrative. This is amendment number 6 is the Water Supply Improvement Program completion date, which has been updated, or this amendment would update from December 31st, 2015, which was not met, to the current estimated date of December 31st, 2021. And the last amendment is regarding the regional groundwater storage amendment. This amendment more accurately describes the operational details of this regional groundwater storage program, and it's a program to utilize the storage capacity of the groundwater, which benefits the region. However, Palo Alto is not a party to this project. So on to the water supply amendment adoption process. On December 11th of last year, the SFPUC already approved the amended and restated water supply agreement, and it's pending approval by the wholesale customers right now. And BOSCA is recommending that all the member agencies adopt the amendments by the end of March. And as Jonathan mentioned earlier, this item is going, we're planning to take it to the City Council on consent in March the 4th. And the recommended motion that staff is seeking from you tonight is to recommend to the City Council to adopt a resolution approving the amended and restated water supply agreement with San Francisco. So.
All right, thank you, Lisa. Any further questions from commissioners? You will put on your microphone. Yeah.
Environmental analysis with this.
There is a statement that the attorneys have approved saying that this is not considered a project, but I don't have any much more detail than that.
Where does the approval process stand with the members of BOSCA at this point?
I know that some of them have approved it, but I'll let Nicole speak to that.
There's been about 5 so far that have approved it. Getting it onto calendar in January was pretty quick. So pretty much everybody now has it on schedule and would have been indicating no problem in having action taken before March 31st. But the count is 5 that I have so far.
So you don't anticipate anybody raising questions?
I do not. I do not.
So I have one question actually about the oversight of the capital improvement program. I understand that this amendment allows BOSCA some ability to get insight into the capital improvement program, but is there an opportunity for BOSCA or members to object to the capital improvements? I mean, what happens if BOSCA says we don't think that's appropriate? Can the PUC do it anyway?
So that speaks to the uniqueness of your contract, and the short answer is there's not much you can do. Again, it goes back to they're required and obligated to provide you water. 184 million gallons per day, that's their obligation. You expect that. And you're obligated to pay your share of what it takes to get that, including the necessary capital improvements. The history has been more, and leading up to what was the Water System Improvement Program, up until 2003, San Francisco actually failed to do necessary capital improvements. They just didn't want to do them. And in fact, when we went to the legislature, when you all went to the legislature to form BOSCA, you also went at the same time with a bill that required San Francisco to fix the system, because at that time, the system was subject to failure from a maximum credible earthquake of 60 days outage of water in the entire area. So that's the history of it. And the PUC has since turned around. That capital program is 97% complete. So interestingly enough, this amendment is patterned off of what was successful with WISIP. And San Francisco is, in many ways, they're an unregulated monopoly. They don't report to anybody, right? But they are very prideful, and a public process has proven to be very effective to get them to do what you want to do. And so that's what this amendment is trying to take advantage of, is basically getting inside, getting enough information so that we can either impact the decision before it goes to their commission, or if not, then be educated and smart enough to be able to affect the discussion publicly. And as we have in the past, and we remind them often, you are a very strong region legislatively. We have gone to Sacramento to get what you need to get in the past. And in the case of Mountain Tunnel and trying to get them to do the work on Mountain Tunnel, that was an active conversation with them. If you don't do this, we're already talking to our legislators, you need to get this done. So it's an interesting dance because of you don't have any representative control up there.
Thank you.
Very interesting. Anybody else? Any further discussion? I've got it. Please.
I just wanted to ask about the Tier 1 drought plan. The language, I'm on the page with the new language around in the event that the SFPC share of the available water supply, et cetera, and the table showing how the SFPC share goes from 35 up to 37.5% as the system-wide reduction comes into play. But, okay, the answer might just be occurring to me. I didn't actually work out how many millions of gallons per day that works out to in each tier. I was just looking at that in a non-drought year, their allocation, the SFPC allocation is 30.5%, is that right?
So,
and so it feels, is it the case that it still jumps up?
So
small
this
drought
goes back
conditions?
to this table, when this table was adopted originally. So the table was from the original version of Tier 1, was back in 2001. Those percentages were consistent essentially with the share of water between San Francisco and the wholesale customers. So when we talk about things that have changed over time, one of those things is just that it's not your allocations from the system haven't changed, but your actual use comparison between each other, kind of like you're sharing a pizza pie, right? You're sharing a whole pizza with San Francisco. They get a share of it. And in the last 20 years, they've reduced more by comparison to you. You've both grown, but they've just reduced, they've reduced a little bit. They haven't grown as much. So that's where these percentages went out of whack. And they weren't as effective as we thought they would be back in 2001. San Francisco was unwilling to go back and totally remodify this table. And to be honest, with all the changes going on with making water conservation a California way of life, like the statewide regulations about reducing use, and the difference is everybody's seeing with demand, it was hard to know what would be the right number moving forward. So instead, the easier approach was to say, okay, let's let that table stay, but at a minimum, you have to take 5%. And if the table ends up overcoming that, then you'd take more of a cutback. But at a minimum, you'd have to have a 5% cutback. And then also write language in that says, we agree to come back and talk about this as we move forward.
So the 5% cutback is in comparison to use the previous year, 2 or 3, as opposed to 5% less of your percentage of the pie.
You don't, so the allocations are not based upon your percentage of the pies. It is truly based upon what you were using just prior to the drought. So that's where, so this is, you get, 35% of what's available, or San Francisco gets 35% of what's available, and the wholesale customer gets a balance. And that's just, and but it's based upon, it's kind of an interesting math because you're always basing it on the prior use and saying, okay, this is what we're going to use, and then we take the math off of that. It is not perfect, there's no doubt. And that was where the discussions of do we adjust the table created more arguments than not, to be honest with San Francisco. This was the one amendment that they were not interested in touching. There was no reason for them to touch this amendment at all. When I went in and this was almost the last one that we did, and I sat down and I had the general manager with me and the water enterprise assistant general manager, and I said, okay, we've got to deal with this drought allocation. I said, you get a positive allocation in a drought, and the answer was, so? I was like, okay, well, let's talk about this. The contract is about fair allocation of benefits for fair monies paid. We get fair benefits for the fair money we paid. We are paying our fair share of the system costs. We need to get a fair share of the system benefits, and that does not reflect system benefits, a fair share system benefits. And it rolled into some other things that they wanted, and eventually that's what got them around to saying, okay, we'll accept a minimum cutback, but it is certainly not perfect.
Thank you. I might hit you up for a couple more questions after the session if
Absolutely.
I'm allowed, but I won't belabor the group. My last question is just back to asset classification. You stated that this amendment eliminates the need for an expensive new pipeline.
Yes.
Can you speak to that?
Yeah. So last January, when San Francisco put out their most recent capital plan, as part of that, they had a new project in there. It was a new water-only pipeline that would parallel the existing Moccasin pipeline, so basically down the front of Priest Grade. So Moccasin pipeline is a joint facility. Well, it's actually a power facility, but we both use it. The water runs through it. So it's a power facility, it's an old facility, but water runs through it. And they said, we have to put this new pipeline in the CIP because Moccasin may not be a cost-effective power operation for the PUC anymore. And we think that might just go away. And if that goes away, we're not willing to invest in Moccasin pipeline. And so it probably will fail. So the water enterprise was like, okay, well then we need to put in a new water-only pipeline, right? Because the reliability is critical. So they put in an estimated $40 million for that water-only pipeline. And I supported it. because I could see the writing on the wall at that time. We hadn't started these negotiations, but I knew one of the issues was San Francisco's power enterprise is struggling to get enough revenue to pay its costs for its facility maintenance. They have deferred maintenance on it as well. And so they've indicated we may not, they don't get a lot of money for that power because it's hydropower, and they don't use it for their own green power, so it's just not a very attractive facility. So they put that pipeline on, and I supported it. When we were talking about these assets, right, and the question about, okay, which assets are we willing to pay for? Going back to that moccasin pen stock, you have an interest in making sure that stays. It's cheaper to repair an existing pen stock than it is to build an entire new pipeline in that area. So that's where we said, okay, the pen stocks will stay as a joint asset itself. The asset doesn't change, but we'll share in the repair. Because again, the repair is a contained cost. It's cheaper than the water-only pipeline. And now they have an interest in getting it done. Suddenly they want to get it done too, and it's hard for them to say they're not going to do it. So it was a win. And so that pipeline went off the books.
Thanks for clarifying.
You're welcome.
All right. I'm mindful of the agenda, and we have a number of other items. Is that enough questions and discussions, or anything further?
We got anybody in the audience that wants to talk about this?
I didn't get any requests, so. So the staff has asked that we recommend City Council adopt a resolution approving the amendments.
So move.
Is there a second?
A second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Passes unanimously. Lisa, thank you. Carla? Nicole?
Thank you very much.
All right, so we'll go on to agenda item number 2. We do have one citizen comment from Herb Borak. Would this be a good time? Yeah, that would be. Always appreciate your thoughts.
Thank you, Chair Donaher, and good evening. I have 2 comments. The first has to do with reconciling the number of vacancy status on 3 different ways that it's presented here on slides 2 and 3, where it's by, I guess, by division or units. Within each of those, the numbers add up, and my math is correct, it comes to 42.5. However, on slide 5, it's 43.5. And then on slide 7, 2 of the management positions, the assistant director and the manager of operations, are not highlighted in the previous charts. So trying to get all those 3 together, I think, would be helpful. The second comment is a request for more information, which I believe you can have this evening from personal knowledge from the staff who are here. You have on slides 4 and 6 bar graphs for vacancies by division and retirement eligibility by division. I believe it would be helpful to have both of those kinds of charts by bargaining unit, by the Service Employees Union and by the Management and Professional Association. I suspect that the management will be very high in the number that are eligible for retirement. And related to that, you would also need to know, and again, I believe this personal knowledge here this evening, the retirement rules on CalPERS for a base salary. That is, there's been a long wait for a contract, and finally, there is a new salary increase for everybody in management and professional. And the question is, how long would it take? You know, is it 12 months of salary or 3 years of salary? What is used to determine the base salary, and how much time would it be to vest that highest salary that they have now, and to match that against that eligibility for retirement? Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Herb. Commissioners, this number of you have raised at various times these questions about workplace continuity or workforce continuity and shortage of staffing. And in our last meeting, we asked for presentations on this, so really pleased the staff has come forward. Judith and I talked with them on Monday. We don't need to go into line-by-line detail on the particular positions, but we'd like to have a good discussion on the whys and wherefores of recruiting and retention.
So before we begin, we have a few people joining us tonight. We have Tom Marshall here. He's the Assistant Director of Operations. And we also have Sandra Blanche, Assistant Director of Human Resources, and also Irene Silipin, Senior Management Analyst from HR as well. All right, so in the 2018 Utility Strategic Plan, we did identify workforce as one of the 4 priorities. The objective was to ensure that we have staff long-term to continue to provide essential utility services. So tonight, we're going to give the UAC an update of the utilities workforce, including vacancies, retirements or recruitments, and also succession planning. All right. So this first slide is just a snapshot of the department of the 5 divisions. Operations is on the next slide, but the red font denotes the number of vacancies and also the vacant titles in each of the respective divisions. And this is just a snapshot of when it was 2 weeks ago.
Can I just ask one question? The assistant city manager / general manager, so before Ed, they weren't the same position?
No, it was just a director only, utilities director only.
So are we assuming next time that we are going to get somebody who has to do both roles, or can we get somebody who's a utility person and that's what they do?
In the upcoming budget, we are proposing to reclass that title back to a utilities director.
Okay.
Ed was a special breed. All right. Then for this one, this is, as you can see, this is the operations. This has the highest number of vacancies throughout the department. There are currently 26 vacancies, and electric operation has the lion's share of them, which is, they have 18 positions, and as you can tell, it's all across the board, and that represents about a 26% vacancy rate. We'll discuss more about electric operations in the subsequent slides. Here's a chart of vacancies and filled positions. So again, there are vacancies throughout, but I think we are reaching a critical point right now in electric operations, where it may impact our daily operations and our emergency response time. And this is just a status of all our vacancies of the 42.5 positions. So there are 32 currently under recruitment, but I just want to note there are 8 of them in the orange pie slice that are hard to fill positions. These are the lines person, system operators. That's a very unique skill, and it's a very competitive market. So these have been out for recruitment for more than 6 months, sometimes even years.
So Tom Marshall, Assistant Director, Utility Operations. And so we were going to just now talk about the key positions with the electric utility. One of the main areas is the line person cable splicer. These have been vacant for, we've had vacancies in this area, ongoing probably for 10 years. We've never really been full in that position for at least 10 years. Today, we're currently down around 6 people. We had a number of retirements at the end of this year, and we've had a number of positions that have been vacant for an extended period of time. The next position on there is the compliance technicians. They actually are the people that go out and do our inspections. Typically, those are linemen also. They're usually linemen that were typically injured on the job at some point. They can't do the line work anymore, and we put them in the field to do this inspection work. And this is an inspection job that requires line knowledge, and it's usually going to end up being a field person like a lineman to do that. So when we look at this, we're not just really 6 vacancies, we're looking at 8 vacancies right now for people with those skills and journeyman skills. We currently have 2 system operators. This has been ongoing for a number of years. We're now to the point where we have 3 on staff. At one point, we were down to 1 system operator on staff. We have 2 permanent operators. We have a training operator. We're in the process of hiring another person to come in as a training in this area as well. And we still have 1 vacancy to fill, and we're continuing to recruit for that. On the management side, we have 1 position that's still been open for a long time, which is the Assistant Director of Engineering. That's been open, almost 2 years now? And we're doing, rotations and training in that position. The other 3 positions up here, my position, the Manager of Electric Operations and Electric Supervisor, are all looking at retirement in the next 2 to 3 years. So there's going to be a number of additional management vacancies that come up. So this next line is current eligibility to retire by division. And you see there's a lot of positions we still have where people can retire. I will say we just went through the UMPAPA negotiations. There was an increase for people. There's a lot of people looking at leaving in December of this year. They're not in these critical positions, but they're in other positions in the utility. And we're likely to see a large number of people leaving the city at the end of this year as well. So the question is, why are they difficult to fill? Well, this is an industry-wide problem. All utilities are faced with this. We're especially acute here because of the high cost of living, and the people that we're bringing in are doing long commutes. We have people that come in every day from Lodi and other places, and after a while they begin looking for closer jobs. They don't have to make that 2 or 3 hour commute every day or each way. There are 4, sometimes 5 hours of commuting per day to get here. We've seen wage escalation across the industry with other cities where the pay rates have typically been higher than ours as they've escalated faster than we've been able to keep up with their changes. And the other thing with these jobs, these lineman jobs, are 5-year training jobs to become a lineman. So they're going to be in training for 5 years. They come out of that, they're sort of at a minimum level. They can't really be completely on their own working at that point. It takes about another 5 years, almost 10 years of training to get them up to the level where you can send them out to lead a crew and work on their own. So that's one of the major issues we have. We bring people in. We do have people right now. We have 4 apprentices. We have 2 of those apprentices. They're just about to top out at the 5-year mark. But we have to be able to keep them here. One of those apprentices is living in Lodi, and we don't know that they will stay. And so that's one of the issues we have, also retaining them. Once we bring them in, we train them, and then they go off possibly to other utilities. So that's an issue for us as well. So just a general comment about recruitments. We are able to recruit for entry level. We've been able to get people to come into our apprenticeship programs and fill those. So we've been able to do that. We have not been able to attract people at the mid level that come in with skills already in place. So one of the issues we're having right now, we can't have, I can't have like 10 apprentices and 4 linemen. There's not enough people to train those people. So we have to keep it balanced. So we are continually looking for people we can bring in at this mid-level that can also help us with the training of our apprentices. One positive thing, we did interview 2 linemen today, and we may be able to hire a couple people to help us out. At the senior level, at the AD level and things, we've been having difficulty finding people with the skills we need to fill. One of the things with the AD jobs is they're across electric, water, gas, and wastewater, so there's not a lot of people out there that will come in with that experience to cover all those utilities. So some of the things we're doing short term, we're continuing to do things internally. We're working out of class. working job rotations, and where we can, we've been doing promotions within the city. Currently, there's labor negotiations going on with SEIU. I can't really comment too much on that because I'm not really familiar with what's going on, but those are ongoing. I know there is some discussion in those labor negotiations about the linemen and compensation, but I don't really know the status of it to tell you where that is. But we've had some discussions about whether that position needs to be adjusted to be more competitive in the marketplace. Umpapa is going to come up for negotiation for the managers in June of this year, and there'll be a whole negotiation in around that. We mentioned overstrength positions. That's where the city holds basically extra positions. When we have people that are going to retire, sometimes we can get this overstrength position if we know somebody's leaving, so we can bring somebody to work in parallel with them before they leave. And that's what those are for. It says CalPERS exemption. That's where we're able to bring back employees to work, help us out that recently retired before they wait the 6 months. Typically, you have to wait 6 months before you can come back. But there's some exceptions we can do for like emergency situations and training issues that we can bring them back earlier. So we're also looking at that as well to help with the training. And then we use contract service for a number of things. One thing we do use contract services for line work. We have a contractor coming in this month to do, to essentially act as our own crews. Long-term strategy. So one of the issues is to explore the idea of market-based compensation. That's compensation. That's something that we are working on with the HR department to figure out how we might do that and where that's going to go. We're hiring more resources for recruitment. We're evaluating retention pay options. Again, that's in conjunction with the HR department. Working on succession planning, professional development, recruiting and branding, and market-based compensation, which we already mentioned. So, and then we also are looking at departmental reorganization, possibly. So.
With that, I'll turn it over to you. Thank you. Good presentation. I'm sure a lot of questions here, but who would like to start?
So I'm not at all sophisticated about these labor negotiations, but am I understanding correctly that basically you can't change the salary for positions like linemen without having that negotiated as part of the...
Correct. That would be part of the negotiation.
So if you were going to go to a market-based compensation system, that all would have to be negotiated as well.
Yes, that would be negotiated. There's an agreed process for where the salary levels get set, or the city has a process for doing how the salaries are set. And so if that were to change, it would have to be some negotiation with both sides to figure out what that new arrangement would be.
And how long would those negotiations likely take?
I don't know. I mean, I think it would take time. I mean, it could be settled in this labor negotiation. There could be sort of a side agreement for particular positions if the union was agreeable to that. That happens from time to time. I can't really say at this point, 'cause again, I'm not directly involved in that, whether that would be the outcome of this. There would be a side agreement for these positions, but that's a possibility as well to try to alleviate this particular problem.
I just want to comment. For at-risk positions, I think the city does have the right to meet and confer with the union for certain positions for market realignments. So it doesn't have to be just during the negotiations window.
Correct. Yeah, we meet and confer. I think they can get a side agreement. Is that essentially where we end up at, a side agreement with them?
Because it sounds like we're kind of hamstrung in solving some of these problems, but have to have these negotiations first.
I mean, I agree that there's a process you have to go through to get to the end. It's not something we can just decide to make a change on and have it happen.
And one of the challenges with the linesperson is that as we negotiate, other cities and municipalities also negotiating over their linesperson classification. So we don't know where they're heading.
So, I mean, an example is we're significantly behind Santa Clara right now, and we've been told that they're already doing another increase. So it's really difficult for us to keep up with really what's going on.
But just to AC's question of how long it takes, is it weeks or months or years?
It's probably not years, it's certainly probably months for sure.
We have an HR specialist too.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's it.
Yeah. You can sit here.
Good evening. I'm the Assistant Director in Human Resources. To respond to your question, the current contract term end date was December, and we've been negotiating for about 6 months now. So the time period which it takes to negotiate a contract varies. I will say that it seems that in the last 3 contracts, we have been addressing the line person salary, but it's a moving target. You know, it's difficult to keep up with the market. As soon as we negotiate a new salary, our competitors do the same. We're fighting to recruit and retain the same candidates. We see them going from our city to Santa Clara. And if you look on our competitors' websites, Roseville, Alameda, Santa Clara, everyone has a job opening for line person cable splicers. So we're not in a really unique situation. Unfortunately, you know, I think we had 3 recent retirements just in the last month. So that, you know, makes this a more critical point in time. But as Tom mentioned, we are looking at proposals to include retention pay.
Tell us more about the training. These people come out of college or out of high school, go to vocational school? What's the typical background?
They come from a number of places. Sometimes they could be just high school graduates. What we see now is there's line quote colleges where people go to get the training, and so they typically have introductory programs where somebody can go and get sort of the basics. They aren't in an apprenticeship yet, but they go and get sort of a basic knowledge of the skill set for this. And so what we're seeing now is people will go and take that initial course at a line college, and then they'll apply for a job with us as an apprentice. And so we'll pick up an apprentice through that process.
One more comment on that. A lot of businesses have had to look for ways to improve their training programs, make them faster, new tools and the like. Has that been happening in this industry?
Well, I don't know if I know enough to really comment on it a little bit. I think we send our people off to training. So it's a combination of 2 things. One, you got to go and get this training at a training facility to learn the basic skills. And we send people off for 2-week stretches or so to go out to Northwest Line College, which is somewhere in California. I don't remember exactly where. But they go there for a few weeks. And then the next part of that training is they have to come back and they work in the workplace and physically work for another period of time, and then we'll send them off for the next set of training. So it's a combination of the school training and physical things they need to do there, plus having to work and get the skills they need on doing the things on an everyday basis, like climbing poles, and you go and learn how to climb it, but you got to do it more often than that, so you have the skills so you can actually do it, work off the pole if that's what you need to do, if that makes sense. So it's a combination of schooling and real life experience. Yeah. And I don't know if there's a way to get it done much faster than the 5 years, because it's a pretty complicated skill set they have to learn.
Please.
Go ahead.
Oh, no, you fewer.
Yeah.
I'm curious, when the staffing shortages are being filled with contract services, how does the cost of that compare to had the position been filled internally?
So, I mean, that's a complicated question a little bit, because there's benefits and other things that they go into our own employees. But I would say under the current market we have today, it's probably cheaper to have our own employees because everybody needs linemen. PG&E, at a long time, never hired a contract lineman. That's something they do regularly now. So we're all competing sort of in the same market for contractors now as well, and we've seen the prices have increased.
So twice as expensive to have a contractor?
You know, I don't know the
Three
exact
times,
number.
20%
Maybe-
higher?
I would say it's probably, and I'm purely guessing, maybe between 25 and 50% higher. Yeah.
And the recent contract we just established with the dock crew was at $1.5 million per year for 3 years, so $4.5 million total. But it's on an as-needed basis, to put some context.
Yeah.
Sorry, I didn't understand that. I just heard some millions of dollars to do what?
The contract service to help out with the augment, the lines person, it's a $1.5 million contract per year.
And that replaces how many people?
It's usually a crew of, I want to say, 3.
So that's replacing probably a single crew or maybe a crew and a half.
And how many people are in a crew?
3 to 4.
Judith, please.
So I'm curious.
Just say one thing, I mean, don't forget that $1.5 million is fully loaded with, equipment and overhead and so on and so forth.
Sure.
So I think that, that if we just try to deal with this in just the context of standard recruiting and whatever and salary, it's going to be really hard to sort of fix this way. So I have questions in terms of, first of all, what are we doing to recruit from PG&E? Because given that they are now having some serious difficulties, I've got to believe there are people who would be experienced, who might be looking for something that is a little more stable than it would have been in the past.
So we do have contacts with PG&E. I mean, this whole thing with the bankruptcy and all that's relatively new. And so it's sort of sorting out. But we do have contacts that we have at PG&E, and we try to recruit there. One of the issues we do have with people coming over is most other places, the linemen are in the IBEW, which is a trades union for the electric trade, and we don't have that here. So they have to make a decision to leave that trades union and come over and be represented by SEIU. And we've had people do that, so I'm not saying it's just another sort of decision-making that person has to make, whether he wants to leave that trade union and come over and work in the SEIU.
I think another big thing is housing. And even if we can't buy townhouse, whether we can buy, a townhouse complex or something like that in Palo Alto, at least in neighboring things, so that we can give people a place to live that's closer in. I mean, I think that we really need to be looking at this in kind of a creative way. And I mean, things like, maybe we can get their kids scholarships at schools that are closer in this area, whether it's private schools for younger kids or, qualified kids, to go to Stanford or something close. I mean, I think that we've got to look at this in a way that is not normal. And if we can't do something like that, then we have to, I think, do a go, no go. At what point can we really not operate a utility? And I think that one of my concerns about some of the discussions we have about adding new functionality to our utility comes from, if we can't staff what we're doing, how could we staff a new function that could be labor intensive? I just don't we're going to have all the same problems, okay? So I think we should at least try to solve it for what we have. The other thing is, like going to the lineman rodeo and having a big presence. It's sort of a competition where linemen from all over the country come to compete, and it's a great training circumstance, whatever, and maybe we need to go there and talk about how great it is in the Bay Area. I mean, because I think one of the things that we have going for us here is this is a really fabulous place to live. I mean, it's really nice to be here. And so if we can figure out a way that people can have a decent quality of life, these are very critical positions for, to have our utility workers be able to be supported and be able to live in a reasonable distance from Palo Alto, if not in Palo Alto, is something that would benefit all of us as a city. And so I guess I'd like to say, is there some way that we could look at, have a design session or something where we look at this in a creative way to say, what weird things can we come up with that maybe we hadn't thought of in a normal situation, but it really is something that we have to be able to do and think outside the box a little bit. Because if we can't, we really need to understand before 5 years shows up and everybody's out the door, we need to be planning this in advance if we have to sell off part of our utilities or do something else. I mean, I think this is significant, and I think it's not necessarily being treated with the urgency that it deserves, because it's very substantive, and the problems aren't going away. And I think that a few salary increases or signing bonuses are not going to solve this. So I think it needs to be more systemic in the way we look at this.
So one thing we have been doing recently is attending more job fairs. Our strategic workforce team, they have been attending trade schools and job fairs, even at the lineman schools. So we are getting our name out there and trying to do more marketing.
Please.
So a couple of things. I do agree with Commissioner Schwartz that we need to be thinking out of the box. I'm sort of curious to know how much, if at all, the labor union puts any kind of limitation on what we can think about or what we can do to try to recruit and retain. Well, let's start with that.
Well, first we have to come up with a proposal, but as it was mentioned before, I mean, even if we are not, if it's not a period where we're in current negotiations, we could always request to meet and confer with the union and ultimately bring a side agreement to council for approval. But the first step is getting the executive leadership team and the city manager to review a proposal and get the, make a recommendation that would be feasible to present to council.
So it would be interesting, maybe you already do this, to interview people who are leaving, not for retirement, but for other reasons, to understand why they're leaving, where they're going, what might have been able to keep them here.
So we've had people leave. Typically, they're leaving for pay, and part of it moving to an area where the cost of living is more affordable for them. I think the whole issue of housing is a critical issue. I have at least one employee that lives in their car during the week, and that's, we see more and more difficulties with people being able to afford to come in. And I think the flip side of that also is if they're living a long ways away, we have an emergency, they're not here. It'll take them an hour or 2 hours. We have an earthquake, it might take them 3-4 hours for them to get back in here if traffic is bad and they can't move. So luckily, we have a few people now that are relatively close. We have 3 or 4 people that can get here in relatively short period of time, but I got a large number of people, it's going to take a significant amount of time for them to get in here. But we have enough to come in and triage right now and make things safe, but it could extend the recovery time because we have to get people in here.
Well, maybe it is time to start thinking about some kind of housing, at least during the week, or whoever would be the, on call for any kind of emergency, so that maybe they're not commuting every day, but, cut that in half. That could have a huge impact on quality of life. And then one other comment on the long-term strategies. I wasn't sure if these are what you've implemented now or their thoughts, because I would just strongly encourage to have a succession strategy, especially, we know when people are up for retirement, so even putting aside people who go elsewhere, that should be one where we're keeping an eye on it at all times.
Yeah, so, we do have a succession strategy. The thing that's been difficult is we've had so many people that are in this retirement category, and then the next group of people we have may be relatively new. So maybe they're ready to go to that middle level, but they're probably not ready to be the assistant director or one of those other positions right now. And we've been trying to recruit from outside for some of those. I don't know that we've been all that successful bringing somebody in, but we're still looking at that.
So when we replace Ed, okay, in that role, okay, in terms of recruiting somebody who's maybe a little younger, but who's very experienced, who's come from a utility where they have multiple resource streams. There are some munis that have, we are not the only ones that have water, gas, electric. There are others as well. To really make a play to get somebody who really is very respected. What are we, because what happened the last time when we, I know there was a headhunter and they didn't do it. As far as I could tell, I spent a lot of time trying to give input, giving names, whatever, and I checked and nobody that I gave them names of, did they ever call any of them? And I think Ed did a great job, and I thought, and I was, pleased with, even though he didn't come out of the utility industry, he was a really good manager, and so I thought he did a great job, and the feedback I got from you guys was that he did a good job. But I think we need to look at really getting somebody who can possibly attract other people because they want to work for someone who's doing a good job, and there are good people out there, and I just I'm not sure. I know that we're not necessarily in the position to do much about it, but is there anybody we can help light a fire under to say, hey, this is, there's urgency to this, and let's really make a play for it to get good senior level people, because I think we can't do this. We can't solve our way out of this problem with entry level people.
Terry, did you have any? Okay, so one question first. What salary ranges are for the lineman jobs and equivalent jobs?
The linesman's is about 125,000. Same with the compliance person, maybe 130,000.
For entry level or for?
That is actually on the higher level, journey level.
Oh, after 5 years or something, or okay, very, very good. One reason I wanted to have a discussion, and we've been provoking you on this, is I think it's fair to say if we're not in an emergency situation, we're one or two steps away from being in an emergency situation on staffing, and wanted to be sure the city council is aware of that and that we don't have overly strict financial restrictions on the ability to do what we have to. And Judith, I hear you that we need to be creative and think about other things, but in the end, it does come down to money on this, whether it's spending for housing or salaries or retention or whatever. And I wanted this conversation to highlight that we're, one step away from emergency on this. And I think I see people nodding around. That would be the sense of the commission, certainly. So. All right, well, that'll give us something to worry about till next month. Any further comments or questions?
Commissioner, if I could just address Commissioner Schwartz's your comment about bringing in candidates from other agencies. I mean, we have been recruiting. We had a couple of candidates from Long Beach start last year, from Hawaii. So we are recruiting from other agencies. And then they just need to be, trained on the Palo Alto utility and address areas where they may not be quite at the level that the current management team would like, but they are being hired, and then they get started on a training program.
Right, but I'm also talking about like the wrong way, a general manager and engineering directors and things like, senior level people we have some really good people on our staff who would really benefit from having colleagues who have been through some of the stuff that they're about to embark on. We're talking about doing AMI. Wouldn't it be great to have somebody who was the number 2 person at a comparable size utility who had already been through this? It's not so that everybody isn't having to learn on the job. I think that we have something very positive to offer. And I think that we've got to our folks don't get exposed. Because we don't send people to conferences, they don't get to just know people casually that they can say, hey, we've got a job opening. We're not necessarily doing the things that put the people who we could really use in our orbit. And so that's the kind of thing that we have to do that we haven't been doing.
All right. Lisa, you looked like you were going to make a comment?
Well, I think most of my thoughts have been stated by others, but, it's like, as you point out, it comes down to money. And it's just, I have a mental disconnect between the idea that if we wanted to offer raises, we have to negotiate with the union. It's like, how could the union possibly object if the utility comes in and says, we want to give all the linesmen a raise? So I just wonder if I probably don't entirely understand how the system works, but it's just from the outside, it strikes me as very odd. And I just want to also observe that when we talk about capital improvements, the last time I was on the budget subcommittee, we talked a fair amount about how construction costs are up something like 30% in a very short amount of time. I forget exactly, 1, 2, 3, 5 years. And I remember having a discussion here about it costs what it costs. And, the utility has to be safe and reliable in addition to cost effective. And so I'm just left sort of scratching my head why it should be so hard. So again, just to chime in on Commissioner Danaher's observations, that it does feel like any role we can play if City Council doesn't seem to understand the magnitude of the problem, it would be great if the record could show that we feel this might be one of those times where it costs what it costs, and we have to do what we need to do to keep the utility safe and reliable.
And I want to add one thing, because one of the pieces of direction that we've gotten from City Council is how important it is to keep our rates below PG&E, okay? That's one of the things they care about, okay? Well, if that means we don't have the resources to pay people adequately to staff the utility, then it seems like a sort of silly goal if we can't run the operation. And so, again, I don't know what the right way is to be able to elevate it, but I think we need to support you in challenging that goal.
Well, I don't know that we need to challenge that goal. The staff costs are 10 to 15% of the overall budget. So you could increase that measurably without increasing the overall budget measurably. Most of our costs come in other inputs. One final question, because we did a citizen comment on this. You've got 2 unions. Is one of them dealing with most of the technical positions at issue?
So the 2 quote union, we have SEIU, which is representing the trade jobs, and then there's UMPAPA, which is representing the management employees and utilities.
Okay. For the linesmen and others, those are in the SEIU. Correct. Okay, great, thanks. thank you very much for responding to our request for a presentation on this topic, and for all you coming as well.
And let us know what we can do to help.
Okay, we'll relay this conversation with Dean, Ed, and Rumi, our HR director.
Okay, great. So we're behind schedule, but that was an important topic. The next one is upcoming home energy and water reports, and presentation on that from, I don't know whom.
Can you? All right, so moving right along, I'd like to introduce Lacey Lutz, a utility marketing administrator with our Utility Program Services Group. This is a group that runs all of our customer programs. We wanted to bring this item to you tonight because home energy and home water reports touch virtually all of the customers in Palo Alto. And so we wanted to make sure, we're planning to launch a program later this year. We wanted to make sure that you had an opportunity to understand what we're doing, the lessons we've learned from our past programs and the best practices we plan to implement, and have an opportunity to ask us questions. So I'll turn it over to Lacey for a brief presentation, and we can jump right into the questions.
Hi, I'm Lacey Lutz. I'm a utility program manager, and I work for Jonathan in our resource management division. And I wanted to present tonight about our home energy and water reports program. I started in 2012, and it was the very first program that I was assigned and had the opportunity to manage. And over the last couple, there we go. So tonight, I just wanted to do, I know we're running behind schedule, so I'll try and make it quick. Quick little background on what the program used to be leading up to where we are today, the best practices moving forward, and some additional functionality that we have included into the new contracts that we're moving forward and negotiating, an example, and then we have a little bit of time for a question and answer session. So we ran the Home Energy Reports program starting in 2010, and Palo Alto was actually one of the first utilities in the country to do a full territory rollout of the program, as opposed to just a small pilot. And at the time, we saw that there was a water report program that was also available. We went out to RFP because we're one of the, well, I think we're the only utility in the country that does gas, electric, and water, and we wanted one portal and one report program where customers could log in all in one place. So we went out to RFP, tried to find a company that could do that. There were none that were up to the standard that we were looking for. And so we ended up contracting with two separate companies, one that specialized in energy and one that specialized in water. And we had a really successful run of the program for another couple of years. And during that time, we did learn a lot of lessons and had a lot of feedback from our residents about the program. It was only a residential, not commercial program. The program is really significant for our portfolio. It accounted in 2015, which was our last year that we ran it, it accounted for almost 65% of our total gas savings. And as you're aware, gas savings is one of our big focus areas in the recent years that we've had.
Give us a different number. The gas savings, that 65%, how much of that was of our overall gas usage?
It was 1.46%, I believe, of the residential gas consumption.
So residential gas consumption went down 1.5%?
From the program, yes.
Okay, and 2/3 of that was from this program?
I'm sorry, this program accounted for 1.46% of our residential gas savings.
Okay.
And 65% was our total portfolio savings, including commercial.
So what you're saying is gas use went down 1.46% because of this program?
Citywide.
Yeah, okay, thank you.
Because part of at the time, I mean, I remember this coming up, so O-Power only claims 1% to 2% reductions.
Yes.
So I just think that the 22% and 65% are misleading numbers because if it's 65% of 1%, that's really different than it being 65%. So I think that these are, I just have problems with presenting it that way.
We did just get that clarified. This resulted in a 1.5% reduction in home energy use.
Yes, so the importance of this is of all of the programs that we're mandated to run in order to provide energy savings for the city, this program out of all of our portfolio of programs accounted for a significant percentage.
Yeah, I think it's helpful to provide the fraction that Lacey provided there, but we do judge our energy efficiency, and energy efficiency is a sort of grinded out, get little bits of savings around the edges year after year after year, and they add up to big savings over time. And I think sometimes we forget that that's not something that everybody understands. I think we do judge ourselves on our overall savings, and I think these numbers very accurately reflect the contribution of this program to our portfolio of savings.
So this is our best efficiency promotion program.
That's the point we're trying to make. Yeah. Exactly.
And also one of our most cost-effective programs.
Okay.
For the total dollar amount that we spend versus the energy savings that we acquire through it, it is a very cost-effective program.
Okay.
So recently we have decided to move forward to relaunch this program. We did go out to RFP, and we have figured out a way to provide a single sign-on solution for our customers. And so this is just taken directly from the report that we've provided you. We have a couple opportunities for improvement that we learned during our last rollout. One of our issues was having transparency in the comparison algorithms that we were using. So not just specific to our contract here that I'm working on right now and negotiating, but really industry-wide. The industry for this type of comparison program has realized that transparency is very important. And so now they have the ability to put right on the reports and right on the portal what the comparison demographics are actually doing. So it's the number of people in the house and square footage and your zip code and who's in your cohort, as opposed to just saying, oh, you're doing great, and not giving any.
And are they doing things like, do you have an office at home versus a swimming pool? Because in Palo Alto, hardly anybody has a swimming pool, but that was the way they did it, and they didn't do anything about, do you work at home, which is a lot of people in Palo Alto, and so that is that kind of stuff going to show up?
Yes, so we've taken into account things like what you're talking about. So people who have solar PV systems, people who have purchased electric vehicles. We realized that we were sending out messaging telling everybody that, oh, we're very supportive of electric vehicles, and then at the same time kind of penalizing them on these reports because their energy use went up, and that's mixed messaging. So we've addressed a lot of these issues, and just industry-wide, these programs, O-Power, like you mentioned, has addressed these issues. And we also are aware of our electrification efforts, and so we want to make sure that when different homeowners are in different circumstances, we have a more fair comparison. So I'm negotiating into the contract the ability for us to make these types of adjustments per individual's life situations.
So a lot of utilities got a lot of pushback about the comparisons, because women particularly have not liked them. And so and one thing I was struck by in the report was the idea of like gamification being a new idea. Gamification has been out there for a while. I mean, it's not like it's brand new. There's like a ton of companies that have been doing it. So I guess what I'm concerned about is, the household comparison is kind of old school, and I hate to think that that's what we're doing for our new thing coming forward when, again, I had understood we were working with SEW. Mm-hmm. Okay, and so, I think they have some, I've looked at what they've done, and they have some really cool things that are not just the comparison with the neighbors, which really irritates a lot of people. And so I guess I want to, in your negotiation, that we not just get that, but that we get some of the newer things that are being done as well. Because I just, again, we don't have interval, we don't have interval data, which limits us of what we can do. But, I think that one thing that could be really useful maybe at another meeting is to, let this group see a demo of what the portal looks like and what they're doing, because I think it's a really nice implementation, but I'd hate to have everything focus on household comparison.
Right, so my next slide, talking about the additional functionality, specifically the energy challenge module. And you are absolutely correct that the comparisons are not a new thing. It is tried and true, and they do have really solid results. So we will be moving forward with that. But in addition, we have the option to run energy challenges that's using gamification, which is not something that we have done here in Palo Alto before. So we will have this implementation and the portal, and I would be happy to do a walkthrough of the portal and the opportunities for you guys.
So we are coming next month with a portal demonstration, from what I understand, so.
And that's not going to include these programs, but we could also do that at another time.
I think it's just important to recognize, too, that the high level of effort that staff's put in to create flexibility in this contract and to implement all the best practices. Again, home energy and water reports have been around for a while, and so that gave us an opportunity to really research and identify all the best practices to make sure that we had the best implementation of a comparison program that you can, while also realizing that that's not what we want to be doing forever. So we have flexibility to do other things as they become a little more accepted on how you implement them in the utility world anyway.
And with AMI, we'll be able to do more sophisticated, so time will come.
So, Lacey, how bad is the staff hassle level on these comparison kinds of things? Because my big worry is how bad is that on the staff to try to get some results out of that? Because my impression is that people are going to complain like crazy for anything they don't perceive where they're God's gift to the world.
Good question. So as far as the burden on staff to run a program like this, it's very, very low staff time once it's launched because the third-party consultant runs the entire program. As far as responding to customer comments on the program, when I was running this starting in 2012 for the 4 years, 2012 through 2016, I received very few comments on the water side. So the water comparison and water reports had a fairly positive response. I did receive some negative comments on the energy side. For the most part, it's a few squeaky wheels. And there were definitely residents that had some issue to it. A lot of it, though, was a lack of understanding the comparisons, and I take that on myself because that was clearly I was not communicating what the program was doing and what the algorithms were doing. So after learning that experience, I can now move forward and do it differently this time. Also, a big group that did have some complaints were the solar customers because they were actually left out of the program last time. So a significant number of those customers came forward and were complaining that it wasn't fair that they didn't receive the reports and that they wanted them. So now we've figured out a way to give them their own comparison cohort where they can compare themselves to previous years. Because there's no way that, we don't know what their solar generation is. So we're trying to address those who didn't like it for certain reasons and fix it, and then those who didn't get it and wanted it and are now able to fix that as well. So both sides.
One of the things they did was if you asked any questions at all, the vendor just pulled you out of the program. So they, even if you didn't ask to be pulled out, they pulled you out, and they just dropped you from the program if you asked a question. So that may have, no, it happened to me, so I know I watched how it happened. And so I just think that you maybe didn't get all the comments you might have gotten, or all the feedback.
I think there are risks with being an early adopter sometimes, and yeah, I mean, we just learn from it. I think the other thing that that you wrote about in the report is the fact that this can serve as a outreach and marketing channel for. It's tied in with other other programs and other features that allow people to actually take action if they see that they'd like to reduce their energy use. So it's, you can get complaints, but it can also be a channel for positive interaction with the customers, and it reaches everybody, which is great.
All right, well, we'll look forward to seeing the portal next month. Are we okay to move on to the next agenda item? Lacey, thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right. Preliminary rate changes for all our utilities.
Okay. We're getting to that time of year where we start talking about the rates and the budget. I will introduce Eric Keniston, as Senior Resource Planner in charge of our rates. I do want to note this year, I guess I want to do two things. First, I'd like to do a time check and see how quickly you'd like us to move through this presentation. Part of the reason that I want to ask you that is that we are experimenting with a new longer presentation format. We've included that longer format just for the water utility right now. We're conscious of the fact we have 3 new finance committee members who haven't had as much exposure to the utilities probably, and we'd like to give them an overview that's digestible and broken into chunks rather than as tightly summarized as we normally do. So we would love to get your feedback on that, but we also are conscious that it's getting late, and if you'd like us to keep it short, we are happy to do that. So the feedback you have on that would be great.
Well, I appreciate the question. The agenda item number 5 is going to take 2 minutes, right? Yeah, okay. So we have time for this, not half an hour, but faster, and I appreciate you taking that into account, that we don't always absorb the highly dense stuff, so that's very good.
And with that, good evening, Commissioners. So we're bringing forward to you the preliminary rate changes for electric, gas, water, and wastewater collection for FY 2020. Again, these, so in these projections, we include refuse for information, but we don't, that's a public works item, but we've gotten some preliminary guidance from them of what they're thinking of doing for at least FY 2020. Communication plan is being prepared. And also I want to say that this year we are wrapping up gas and water COSA updates and are planning on doing our wastewater COSA next year. The electric COSA we finished 2 years ago, so that's relatively fresh. When we came to you last year, we were projecting about a 5% overall rate increase. We had about a 3% electric, we were estimating 8% gas, et cetera. That those projections have changed based upon actual ending reserves for FY18. So where we're seeing now is electric, we're estimating a need for about a 9% rate increase, gas a 10% rate increase. Water and wastewater came down a little bit, so 7 and 4% there, no refuse rate increase, but still an overall 5% residential rate change is about what we're seeing right now. So ongoing cost containment, we have as part of our...
Yeah, so we can speak to this. We spoke with the Finance Committee last year about work we're trying to do to make sure that we are conscious every budget cycle about looking for ways to contain costs, while at the same time not sacrificing service, which is the balance we've been talking about here tonight. So we are advancing, one of the things we've done is advanced our preliminary rate forecasts so that before the division heads are submitting their budgets, they understand what the rate outlook looks like for the next year, and they can be conscious about where to focus their efforts on efficiencies. Of course, ongoing management review of personnel actions to look for places where we can, run more efficiently, both to deal with both deal with the vacancy issues and to deal with costs. And then regular review of performance metrics and expenditures. And a part of the strategic plan is trying to build those performance metrics to make them more actionable. We have a list of cost containment examples. A lot that we've implemented over the past couple of years, or that we're looking to implement over the next years. In the interest of time, I won't go through them, but if you have questions on any of them, we're happy to answer questions.
So moving on to the electric projections, our initial proposal is for about a 9% rate increase. Right now, the operations reserves are below minimum guidelines, but we have $11.4 million in the hydrostabilization reserve and $41 million in the special projects reserve, which we can tap if needed. And beyond that, future rate projections are for 3 to 5% rate increases thereafter. Once we get past this 9%, we are looking to have revenues matching expenses from here on out. One of the things we are facing in the electric utility is declining sales. So we have seen a couple years ago, we had our highest electric sales. It's been declining steadily. But we're seeing that in most of our utilities, where we're having, in water and gas, for instance, after we came out of the drought, we had a spike. We've seen now leveling off of usage and coming back into what I'd say is our historical long-term decline as people get more efficient and have better appliances and whatnot. We just see a natural, I don't want to call it erosion, but essentially that's what it is of usage over time. Again, our supply operations reserve is projected to be a bit below minimum, but we're talking with, we weren't able to get a transfer from the hydrostabilization reserve at the end of FY18, but we're planning on trying to do that in FY19, so we can hopefully bump that up this year. The distribution operation reserve is projected to skim right along the bottom, but then come back up over time.
So if we look at this, it's the supply operations reserve. It's the biggest item there.
Yes.
In all of this. The reserve is below recommended levels, and want to increase it by 20 million over the next few years. Is that about right?
Okay. Correct.
So Eric, what changed from last year? I mean, you were predicting a 3% increase, and now you're talking about a 9% increase. What happened to cause that change?
So some of the things that we've been seeing, we do have a larger load for, if we look here on the cost graph, we are experiencing higher electric commodity costs, mainly passing through of transmission-related costs, but we're also seeing higher capital investment for underground district rebuilding, 12 kV conversion projects. So some of the costs related to capital investment have come up and are higher than what we've seen in the past. Plus, again,
that's just due to higher costs, labor costs and so on.
Higher labor costs, higher overhead, higher bids that we're seeing on projects that we go out for. And again, when we do have fewer sales, then we have those rate increases get spread over fewer and fewer units. So. And that will be, unfortunately, it's a common theme, I think, across most of the utilities. So, moving on to gas. On the gas side, a 15% distribution rate increase, which, when you factor in supply cost, equates out to about a 10% overall bill impact. Here we are, the plan is to try and resume going back to annual main replacement projects. We've been doing them about one every other year in budgeting. The goal is to get back on to doing budgeting for one every single year. We've also added in cross-border contingency costs in the gas side. some things. We've also seen increases in our regional backbone transportation costs. Some of our costs, for instance, the PG&E local transportation, the commodity, cap and trade, those we pass through based upon current market conditions, or PG&E's, the local transportation is on their, we have a wholesale schedule from them, and we just pass that through directly whenever it changes. But things like the backbone transportation costs are baked into the commodity cost and include transportation like through Malin or from the outer areas and into California. And we've been seeing those costs increase as well, but those don't necessarily lend themselves very neatly to being a pass-through component.
What's our exposure, do you think, in terms of if PG&E goes into bankruptcy, or if they sell off the gas part of their operation to somebody else? Have you taken that into account at all?
So we're still exploring that. We don't PG&E. We don't sell much to PG&E. We're less concerned about, I think, direct exposure and more concerned about indirect exposure. Loss of privileges on the transmission pipeline, or PG&E passing costs through into the transmission access charge that we pay. We're working with NCPA on they're helping us to some extent with coordinating a response on that front. So we don't have anything yet to be able to talk to you about. There may be exposures, but they're likely to be indirect, and we'll have to see how that unfolds in the bankruptcy court.
So again, in a similar situation with electric, our revenues are currently below current costs, and definitely below projected costs, which is why we're seeing looking for the need for 10% rate increases, at least for the next 2, maybe 3 years. So again, with this, though, we are keeping the reserves within the minimum and maximum guidelines, but our operations reserve totals it's not that much money to deal with. So our minimum guideline level here is only about $6 million. So we don't have as much cushion as we do in some of the other funds. Moving on to wastewater. Proposed 7% rate increase here. This fund, we're seeing an increased amount of CIP work, both upon our own distribution system here in Palo Alto, as well as the increased CIP work out at the plant to bring that up and bring it up to current standards, as well as to build sludge dewatering facilities. That's almost, I believe, ribbon cutting's getting ready to come up pretty soon on that. But the water quality plant is got a whole host of future planned capital projects. They're going out for bond on a lot of that, so those costs will be spread over time and shared amongst all the partners. But it is, an aging facility and will require quite a bit of rehab work out there. And here you can see the blue bars are related to the costs Palo Alto we see from the treatment plant. And the orange is the collection system side of capital for the streets within Palo Alto. And we don't really the collection side doesn't have that much debt service, but within the treatment capital expense, most of that is all going to be debt service related. Here again, 7 to 8% rate increases, but this one is the smallest fund in the way of having operations reserves and the size of such. So we'll be drawing those down pretty quickly, hitting minimum by FY 2022. Now, 7 to 8% rate increases sounds like a lot, but it's about $2.50 to $3 per month is what the bill impact on those are going to be. The water utility. So this one here is our expanded presentation. And here in water, we're proposing a 4% overall rate increase. We're tentatively this time around planning on, it's something we discussed in prior years, of separating out the commodity rate as a separate pass-through component. We're allowed to do that under the law. And it seems like a good year to do it because as of this point in time, SFPUC is sounding like they're not planning on increasing their rates until 2022 or 2023. So it's a good time to make that change. One of the things we're also evaluating right now in our water COSA is potentially merging the residential meter charges instead of having multiple prices by size, having just one meter charge for all residential customers. But we're still evaluating that at this point. So the water utility, as most of you are aware, we transport water from the Hetch Hetchy system and bring it down through a very large series of pipes all the way down here to the Bay Area. It's an expensive system to maintain. We've got currently a $4 billion project cost to bring up all the seismic work on across all the fault lines, but beyond the Hetch Hetchy and in the upcountry system, there's a whole host of additional capital improvement work that will be needed in future years. Here in Palo Alto, that SFPUC water accounts for about 40% of our overall cost, and the rest, about 60%, is related to our own internal distribution. Since for over the last 10 years, well, see, from 2014 to 2024, we're projecting about an overall average about 4% percentage of cost increase over time. It's been a little bit lower in the past between 2014 and 2018, and we're projecting it to pick up a little bit between 2018 and 2024. But supply has been increasing by about 5% over, it's gone up a little bit more than what the distribution is. Why is that? Again, the water system improvement project. Talked about that earlier tonight, so I won't belabor these slides too much. But yeah, 96 to 97% complete. In the upcountry system, it still needs quite a bit of work beyond that, so it's not as if once this capital improvement project is done, things stop and it all levels out. Costs, projects will still continue, maybe not as large, but we will still continue to have cost increases there. This slide shows what is sort of the benefit of the drought. During the drought years, SFPUC projected that water sales would be quite a bit lower than what they actually materialized at. So they were passing on those relatively fixed costs and assuming a much lower sales level, had higher rate, but people used more. So essentially, they collected more money. And that's one of the reasons why we're, at this point in time, they're not seeing the need for a rate increase until, say, 2023. If we did not have that balancing account, that red dotted line is where rates would be at otherwise. So you'd see that slowly inclining rate projection on, where they're at. Well, we're projected about 2024, they would all catch up, and we'll get back on track. Again, just coming back, we talked about the supply. Now let's talk about operations cost. Here, capital accounts for a little bit more than 50% of our distribution-related costs. Operations is about 40%, and debt service is about 10%. You can see over the last, say, 5 years or so, it's been increasing slowly by about 3% overall, but it's going to be ticking up. We think it's going to go up a little bit faster going out into, say, 2024. Some of the reasons for this, we know that benefit costs have increased, are going up faster than inflation. Overhead costs are continuing to increase by some estimates upwards of 6 to 7%. We also have some additional costs baked into our operations for having backup generators at our pumping stations. So those, That may not materialize, so that could end up bringing down our at least near-term cost proposals. We're still evaluating that internally. So we might be able to bring some of those rate increases down the next time we come to you. On the capital side, as we've talked about, construction costs have increased substantially. We've also had some large one-time costs related to emergency water supply and reservoir here in Palo Alto specifically. And I'll discuss that a little bit later in some of the later slides. But you can see here the underground construction costs going back from 2010 to where they're at currently have inclined precipitously. Not all for water, for gas.
What is the y-axis?
The y-axis, I'm sorry, that it's
100 to 600. What units are those?
dollars per linear foot, if I'm not mistaken.
Oh, okay.
Yes.
Okay. Got it.
Yes. Sorry about that.
Yeah.
I will fix that for next time.
Yeah, it's in the footnotes. I see it now. Good chart.
We should clarify.
Yes.
Yeah.
As to our internal, Palo Alto, as we've discussed, we're about 12% higher for like an average median bill of about 8 CCF. We're higher than the average in our comparable cities around us, but we're not the highest. Redwood City, Menlo Park are higher in certain categories.
For the record, our water tastes better than a lot of the other cities
Yes,
around here.
Yes, it does. So, we're not the highest, but we're definitely above the median level for our residential bills. Now, one of the things, again, we do have an aggressive infrastructure plan here, and you can see that shaded bar on the Palo Alto side accounts for some of the additional sustainable capital investment, how much it adds to our existing capital replacement cycle. We're on an 80-year maintenance cycle here in Palo Alto. We've been doing that for about the last 30 years.
Just one suggestion, back to the median monthly residential bill.
Sure.
It's not a meaningful comparison if somebody's yard is 3 times bigger. Then, like compared to Atherton, would come out pretty well. But having it dollars per foot or cubic foot or something might be more meaningful comparison.
Okay.
Sorry, I was interpreting the chart that way, that it was for 4 CCF, 8 CCF, and 18 CCF.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So these are what the monthly bills equate out to for each one of these.
Oh, I'm not reading
utilities
the
at each one of
fine
these
print
levels.
there.
Yeah.
All of the cities are compared on an equivalent basis. So we compare at a 4 CCF, 8 CCF, and 18 CCF per month customer for each city, under each city's rates.
Okay.
So
okay.
it's always
So
a
you
user with the
equalize for usage.
same usage.
Yes,
Got
same
it,
usage
got it,
across.
thank you.
Yeah, so I pulled the 20th percentile for low, 50th for medium, and the high, you could actually get up in the 30s depending on where you start going, but then the ranges on the graph go crazy, so. Operations costs, let's see. In the other direction, there you go. So operations costs, drivers, again, benefits costs have increased faster than inflation. We already got through this. I'm sorry, I'm rolling the wrong direction. Other factors driving Palo Alto's higher costs. We built more infrastructure up in the foothills. We, at one point in time, planned that there was going to be developments up in them there hills. But that did not materialize. But we also built quite a bit of reservoir structure and a lot of infrastructure up there to help feed that need, which never came about. Reservoirs are expensive to maintain. They do help with emergency water supply issues, but again, it is expensive to maintain all of those. And one of the things we are looking at is seeing whether or not we need to have as many reservoirs up in the hills as we currently have. Possibly consolidate, build one bigger reservoir, or maybe see if there's different ways that we can work with moving water up into different elevations. Or, one of the things we've also examined in the past is seeing if an elevation surcharge would be appropriate. Other agencies do have it. It's something that we can evaluate in future rate studies.
Could you, I'm just thinking of sort of the thinking with the fires that happened. Is there any way to sort of reallocate some of those resources to a sort of fire prevention bucket or something like that, that there might be some other fund that it could be allocated to that might make sense in terms of people feeling good about it being a public safety issue, but not having a direct impact on their water bill? I don't know.
It's something we can evaluate. I know that, definitely for the portion of reservoirs we do, when we say that, for the portion of it that is used for fire flow or for protection, that is actually in the cost of service study, we allocate a portion of that into the fire protection rates. So there is a certain portion that is used, within the residential and commercial sectors, but some of it is directly allocated to the fire rates themselves. But yeah, we could talk about, we could advertise this better. So. And this is an interesting chart just showing over the last 5 years. We went back to 2014 and using that as sort of our, taking like a CPI type basis. If you take where we've come over the last 5 years, Palo Alto rates have increased on average about 6.5% per year. The comparison cities, though, have gone up by about 9% per year on average. And both of those are higher than where straight CPI have been at about 3%, and on the national average for water, wastewater rate increases of about 4%. So it's just a different metric to show that, yes, we are increasing rates faster than inflation, but other places are going faster than even we are, probably to help driving that everyone is working on infrastructure, everyone is seeing increased costs, et cetera. So we've talked about future long terms, getting into the prompt here. For FY 2020 at this point in time, we are seeing that we're probably going to have about an 8% cost decrease, which is pleasant. Again, the majority of this decrease is due to one-time capital decreases. Again, we had a lot of costs in FY 19 for reservoir maintenance, et cetera, and some of that's going to be dying off. We'll have a little bit in future years. Some of the changes that we've seen, we do have some minor CIP decreased spending, operation cost increases, already talked about that, about $1 million for backup generators. Supply costs, we're actually thinking it'll decrease a little bit because we do see water sales potentially declining. And when you look at revenue related to costs, the green line shows where our rates are currently. So we're currently collecting about 97% of ongoing costs. With the 4% rate increase, gets us up to about 98% of ongoing costs. The purple line up above it shows where we're at from other revenues sources, such as interest income, connection fee, or capacity fee revenue. So without that, we'd be even, if those start to erode, it will show that we might need to increase rates even further if those start looking like they're coming down. But whatever the case, we're still not quite collecting our total cost yet. And this just rolls everything up into, you can see how it is this year, past 5 years, and going forward, we're anticipating that overall costs should be coming down a little bit. But then going out past 2024, once we start seeing the SFPUC rate increases beyond 5 years, it starts ramping up a bit more. And this just shows where our operations reserve are, where they're fairly healthy at this point in time, and we like to keep them that way. This is the longer-term view. So we're keeping the reserves well within the bandwidth of our minimum max operating. And I think with that ends our presentation. So again, an overall 4% water rate increase. And any questions that, or comments, additions, subtractions?
Before we get into that question, just put this in terms of process. It's a preliminary report, and we'll be getting a more definitive proposal for action on in one meetings.
In about one, so next month, so water and wastewater, because of the Prop 218 requirement, we have to mail out notices 45 days ahead of the council meeting that we're going to have in order to do them. So we would be coming to you with a proposal next month and then going to finance the month thereafter. That gives us enough time to be able to print notices, get them out the door, and do for proper notification. Electric and gas, on the other hand, those can wait a little bit later. Those can actually go with the budget. So we'll be seeing those probably in the next 2 to 3 months.
It's good to know that we'll get a chance to review this again.
Yes, definitely.
People have questions, or if they want suggestions on data that wasn't included that would be helpful for the report, I thought this was a good report.
And so any suggestions on whether this is the appropriate level of information for the Finance Committee? One of the things you've asked us about in the past is making sure that we're communicating priorities around rates to the Finance Committee. So is this appropriately delivering those priorities and giving them the right information?
I mean, to me, the important thing is to communicate what the cost drivers are, why the rates are changing the way they are, what's really driving that. And I thought both the slides and particularly with the commentary, that was helpful, although that's what I tried to emphasize in the presentation.
Okay, thank you.
The only thing that I could think to add would be, something that illustrated the idea of what are the fixed costs versus the variable costs based on usage. Because I think that this is one of the things that people in the community often raise as a question. They say, well, how come I conserved, I used less, why did my bill go up? And so I think something that illustrates sort of this is the part that has to be socialized across everybody, and that becomes the capacity issue. And that's why I asked earlier about the question of the algorithm of how you were doing that, because I just think I think that would help people understand. The other thing that doesn't relate to the water, but more relates to is why is given that we have such an unbelievable concentration of EVs in town, more than any other place I go, how does that not affect the revenue? And I mean, I don't understand that. Are the efficiencies so great on everything else that having all these EVs doesn't have any impact at all?
I'd say that EVs, they don't actually use a whole lot of energy per se. I mean, so on a per kWh basis, they don't draw a whole lot. Now they do have demand issues on the system, and that may drive up costs that required to replace transformers, et cetera. But they don't really. We're not seeing a big energy draw, increasing our load that way. We've been seeing more, to be honest. What residential-related increases, and we are seeing an increase a little bit over time on the residential sector usage. That's getting more than countered by erosion that we're seeing on the commercial side. And it's not that customers are leaving; it's just that we've seen people are getting more and more efficient, changing their practices, putting in solar. It's really driving down that what we used to have. So
I think something that illustrated those kinds of trends could be really useful, because I think that, particularly with the Finance Committee, because they're always focused on, how do we squeeze a nickel a little tighter, and to sort of show. So I think your point about okay, well, the EV trend is here's where it's going, and here are the more transformers we're having to put in, even though the revenue that's coming in isn't offsetting the cost of the transformers, that kind of thing.
Yeah, so just a couple quick comments. comments. We did have charts. I agree with Judith's point that it's good to get clear picture of the components of fixed supply cost and fixed capital cost and so forth. You've given us the bar charts, which is good on that. It'd also be nice to see in terms of overall percentage or dollars and percentage. We can kind of figure out, infer from here, but to have the numbers stated,
Okay.
50% of the costs in this budget are from supply costs, for example, is useful. I want to compliment you, Jonathan, raced through the slide, but the attention to small items and cost containments add up, and those are all good mindset to have. So kudos on that. And then excellent chart showing the underground cost, which have doubled in most cases over a few-year period, and seem headed that way. Who knows what the economy will bring? Some people predict recessions at some point or slowdown, and who knows if this area is going to be immune or not, but we should have on the shelf things that we can accelerate if we see a recession where costs might go down. That's our only hope in the long term, is to be counter-cyclical and making those capital expenditures on that. So, but excellent reports, really appreciate it in that format. So,
Thank you.
Commissioners, our only last agenda item here, well, pardon me. There's the brief 2-minute report you promised us, Dave, or less, on fiber AMI planning. Thank you, Eric.
Here's a quick update of the recent fiber and AMI studies or planning. Let's see.
Oh, don't worry, we have the slide in front of us.
Okay.
There we go.
So we did meet with the Citizen Advisory Committee back in January and gave them an update of where we are with the FTTN RFP, and that we're reconsidering reissuing it and rescoping it. And then we are also still meeting with legal to go through different evaluations of different tasks and what's considered a conflict if one person was to bid now, what they can and can't bid down the road sequentially. And we will be having we're part of this NorCal Water AMI Consortium. There's like 25 agencies participating in this, sharing stories about their AMI pilots and AMI deployments. So it's a very nice venue to share ideas and even like meter standards and testing. So it happens about once every 2 years. Oh no, twice a year. And this year we're hosting it next Wednesday, I think it is. So I can send you the invitation if you guys are interested. And finally, we are trying to give council an update in March once we get all the legal information sorted out about what we can and can't do going forward about the RFP. And that is the update.
Excellent, excellent. Our last agenda item then is the rolling forecast. We've got busier agendas the next couple of months.
I think there was one item number 6, a selection of subcommittees and potential topics. Is that part of the rolling? Did you guys want to set it?
Yeah, we may consider that.
Okay, all right.
Any commissioners want to suggest any other topics or ask that things be moved up, or are we fine with this?
There was an issue that came up on Nextdoor of some people citizens being concerned about kind of how their bills were tracking, and I checked it out with staff, and it seemed like there was a disconnect between the perception of what was going on and what might really look like the scope of the problem to the utility, so anyway, so could we maybe have a conversation about how that could have happened and maybe it really got resolved, but could we talk about that in the future of what's the kind of thing, because I think people really like the fact that, I said I would go back and I would ask what happened, and it would be really nice if we could give them an answer. And so maybe we could spend a few minutes on that next month rather.
So please.
Thank you, Commissioner Schwartz. Catherine Elbert, Communications Manager for the Utilities Department. Thank you for forwarding that message on Nextdoor. As you know, the city is unable to see messages that residents post in that forum unless they direct message us. So we appreciate your eyes and ears out there. In this particular situation, in which some neighbors were concerned about high water bills, we asked them to contact our customer service center directly so we could look into their account and investigate what might have happened. In one customer's situation in particular, there was a disconnect between the time period in which there was a spike in the water bill versus when the message came out on Nextdoor. It was actually a period of probably 4 or 5 months or so time difference. And we encouraged the customer that in future situations, if you see a spike in your water bill, please contact us immediately. We can go out to the site, we can see if there's a leak, we can check the meter, make sure that the meter was read correctly. And so in this case, the resident seemed to recall that there was some construction work happening out in front of the house and thought it was perhaps city staff doing some work out there. We actually looked into this with all of our utilities and public works crews and found out that it was not our crews doing any work out there. So, but in this case, since so much time had passed, there really wasn't much that we could do.
I know, but there were a couple of people who were starting to say that it was a trend. So I'm not saying we should resolve it tonight. I'm just saying that for a future meeting, perhaps we could talk about these kind of disconnects and how they come up. So I'm not saying, because it was multiple people, that's why and I wanted to make sure it didn't seem like it was a trend. So if we can talk about it when it's on the agenda, we're allowed to talk about it.
Sure, absolutely. I just wanted to make sure that I addressed this particular situation. Thanks.
All right. My last comment is I think that your team has done a great job improving of going through slides efficiently, not reading everything. You get us materials in advance, so Eric's presentations were not in the packages this weekend, but they will be next time. And I think the commissioners read them, and so that helps with efficiency here and more time for discussion and less for speaking to the slides. So keep up the good work on that front. Yeah.
Thank you very much. We'll pass that on to staff.
Yeah.
We've been working hard on
Appreciate that. All right, is there a motion to adjourn?
I second.
All in favor? All right. Sorry we had to go so late, everybody.